You ever feel like you're just living on autopilot sometimes?
Yeah.
Like there's this internal critic just constantly running commentary, or maybe you're always bracing for impact because of something someone might say.
Yeah, yeah. That sense of constraint.
It's like being trapped in a maze, right? Even when the doors seem wide open.
It really is. That feeling of not being truly free, inside your own mind. It's incredibly common. It's almost like we've all been operating under this set of invisible rules we never actually agreed to.
Exactly. And that feeling, well, that's really what this deep dive is all about today. We've been immersing ourselves in material from a truly, truly powerful book,
Hmm.
one that suggests the path to breaking free from those invisible walls is maybe surprisingly direct.
Yeah, the source material guiding us today is from Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements. It's wisdom that draws on the ancient Toltec tradition,
Right.
which is described as, well, a way of life focused on rediscovering your true nature, becoming, as they say, wild, wise, and free again.
And our mission here is pretty simple, really. We want to drill down into this material, pull out the most potent insights, and, see how these core ideas might fundamentally shift how you understand your life.
And your relationships, the very nature of reality as you experience it.
Yeah.
Because at its heart, Ruiz presents this idea that our personal reality, it's built on agreements we've made,
Huh.
often totally unconsciously.
Okay.
And these agreements, many of them are based on fear, and they create our suffering. But the powerful possibility he offers is that by consciously changing these foundational agreements, you can actually transform your entire experience,
Transform it how?
moving from what he calls the dream of hell to a new dream, basically a personal heaven on earth.
Okay, so let's start right there. This dream of hell idea, what exactly is it? And how do we end up living in it?
Well, Ruiz talks about something called the dream of the planet. You can think of this as the sort of collective human consensus reality.
Like all the rules and beliefs.
Exactly. All the rules, beliefs, laws, social norms, religions, cultures. Basically, the shared story humanity has agreed upon over millennia.
Right. It's like the operating system everyone around us is running on. But how does that become my personal reality? That jump feels big.
Ah, that's the process he calls domestication. It's kind of intense when you think about it. From childhood, long before we could choose for ourselves.
Right, when we're just absorbing everything.
Precisely. We were trained. Parents, schools, religious institutions, TV, media, they captured our attention, used repetition, and applied punishment and reward.
Classic conditioning.
Yeah, basically to teach us how to fit into that outside dream, what to believe, how to behave. It's like, well, the analogy used is domesticating an animal, but it happens to us, molding us to fit these collective standards.
So we're essentially programmed then to adopt the outside world's rule book. What happens inside us when that programming really takes hold?
Okay, so this training, it creates what Ruiz calls the book of law in our minds.
Our personal rule book.
Your personal rule book, exactly, based on all that absorbed conditioning.
Mm.
And once that's installed, two internal forces kind of pop up to enforce it. The judge and the victim.
Ah, the judge and the victim. I think we all know those guys. How do they keep us trapped?
Well, a judge uses that book of law to constantly evaluate everything we do, think, feel. Did you follow the rule? No. Guilty. Pow.
Relentless.
Totally. And the victim is the part that takes that judgment, carrying the burden of blame, guilt, shame. It's this internal courtroom that runs nonstop,
Hmm.
often leading to just relentless self-punishment.
Wow. It sounds like we become our own harshest critics. Like we're perpetuating the very domestication we experienced from the outside, but now it's coming from inside us.
Precisely. That's exactly it. And Ruiz highlights the consequence of all this internal conflict and all these absurd beliefs. He calls it the mitote, sometimes translated as Maya.
The mitote, what's that?
He describes it as this chaotic fog, like
Mhm.
1,000 conflicting voices and ideas just swirling around in your mind. Yeah, it makes it incredibly difficult to see clearly, to even know who you authentically are beneath all that noise.
That sounds exhausting
Yeah.
and just disorienting and miserable, frankly. And the book actually describes this state, right? Driven by fear and beliefs. And he says, what, 95% of our beliefs are lies?
Something like that, yeah. He calls it a nightmare,
A nightmare.
a dream of suffering, fueled by fear, injustice, violence. Ruiz makes this really striking comparison to religious descriptions of hell.
But not like a place after death.
No, no, as a state of being right now,
Hmm.
where those internal emotions, anger, jealousy, envy, hate, they literally burn you from within. He argues many of us are already living in this internal dream of hell.
And a key thing keeping us stuck there is our resistance, right? Our resistance to just being ourselves, that deep-seated fear of authenticity.
Yeah, Ruiz suggests the biggest fear humans face isn't really death itself. It's taking the risk to truly live, to express who we actually are. We're terrified of not being good enough, terrified of rejection. And this fear, it drives us to perform, to wear these social masks, desperately seeking acceptance by pretending to be what we think others want us to be.
Which creates this awful internal split, doesn't it? Where we reject our real selves because we feel like we can't possibly live up to some impossible image of perfection we've absorbed or maybe even created ourselves.
And here's a really profound insight. He links to that. The connection between that internal self-rejection and our external experiences.
How so?
The book makes this powerful statement. The limit of your self-abuse sets the limit for what you will tolerate from others.
Whoa! Say that again.
The limit of your self-abuse sets the limit for what you tolerate from others. So if your internal judge is constantly condemning you, you'll subconsciously feel you kind of deserve poor treatment. It makes you susceptible to abuse or just negativity from the outside world. Our external relationships often just mirror that internal dynamic.
Wow, okay. So the cage isn't actually outside us. It's built inside our own minds. That's heavy, but also maybe hopeful. How do we dismantle it? How do we break free from this dream of hell?
Well, the journey definitely starts with awareness, seeing this whole setup. But the goal, ultimately, is spiritual freedom.
Meaning?
The freedom to simply be who you authentically are, free from all that internal programming. Ruiz really emphasizes the barrier isn't usually external circumstances. It's the internal structure, the judge, the victim, the belief system. We are the ones stopping ourselves from being free.
It reminds me of watching really young kids, maybe 2 or 3 years old. They're just wild, free, happy, totally present. They're not afraid to express huge emotions or just boundless love. We started that way.
Exactly. That's the state he points to. And to reclaim that innate freedom, we need to break the fear-based agreements that have drained our personal power over the years.
Break the agreements, okay.
And the Toltecs have this really potent metaphor for this internal structure. The judge, the victim, the beliefs they enforce, they compare it to a parasite.
A parasite, living in the mind.
Yeah. Feeding on the negative emotions that fear creates and basically controlling our personal dream.
So the path out is literally described as a war against the parasite. A rebellion for your own mind.
That's the language used, yeah.
Yeah.
It's framed as a rebellion for independence, for reclaiming your internal territory. Becoming a warrior in this context means actively fighting this internal parasite that dictates your thoughts and emotions, the one that keeps you trapped in suffering.
Okay, a warrior fighting an internal battle. And the Toltec path involves specific skills or masteries for this war, doesn't it?
Yes, there are 3 key masteries mentioned. The mastery of awareness, which is seeing this internal setup clearly, like we've been discussing.
Got it.
Then the mastery of transformation, that's the actual process of changing, of breaking the old domestication.
Okay.
And finally, the mastery of intent, which in this tradition is basically understood as love, with a capital L.
Awareness, transformation, love. And the 4 agreements themselves, they fit into that mastery of transformation. They're the practical strategy.
Precisely. They're offered as the declaration of war against that internal parasite. They aren't just nice ideas. They are powerful, practical agreements designed to build the internal personal power you need to break those deep-seated, limiting, fear-based agreements that cause all the pain.
Okay, let's dive into these 4 pillars then, these new agreements. The first one, be impeccable with your word. You mentioned this is seen as the most important and maybe the most challenging. Why is that?
Because the word here, it's understood way more deeply than just, spoken language.
Okay.
Ruiz describes the word as the power we have to create, to express, to communicate, to think literally, to manifest our reality. He says it's your most powerful tool, the tool of magic.
Magic.
Yeah, he even references the biblical idea, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word is God, to really convey its fundamental creative force. Your word is your power to create.
Wow. So using your word impeccably, that's like wielding white magic? Is that the idea?
Yeah. That's exactly the comparison made. Impeccable literally means without sin. And in this context, sin is defined really simply as anything that goes against yourself.
Against yourself, not others.
Primarily yourself.
Yeah.
The greatest sin, he says, is self-rejection. So impeccability with your word leads to life, energy, freedom. Using your word against yourself or others, that leads to a kind of internal death, suffering.
Okay.
So being impeccable means directing your energy, your creative force, towards truth and love. for yourself and by extension for everyone else. It's using your word to build, to give, share, love.
And the flip side, the misuse of the word, that's the black magic part.
Exactly. Using the word to destroy, to harm, to lie, basically to create fear and suffering. We see it on a grand scale, like the example given of Hitler using rhetoric to incite hatred and violence,
Sure.
but also on a smaller, everyday scale. Think about just a thoughtless opinion, a snide remark, telling a child they're stupid or they can't sing. These are like little dark spells that hook into belief systems and cause really deep wounds.
And gossip is painted as particularly toxic, right?
Oh, hugely. Ruiz compares gossip to a computer virus infecting the mind. It's language used with harmful intent that spreads emotional poison, creates confusion, and just feeds that internal mitote fog we talked about.
Makes sense.
And crucially, when you use your word against others, insulting them, blaming them, you're actually using it against yourself, too, because you're introducing all that negativity into your own internal world and often generating negativity back towards you.
Right. What goes around comes around, basically.
Kind of. Expressing love tends to produce love in return. Expressing poison.
Yeah.
Well, so being impeccable is about cleaning up that internal and external language, removing the poison.
So it's a conscious choice.
Yes. Consciously choosing to use your word for truth and love. And this practice, it grants you a kind of immunity from negative spells and toxic ideas from others, because your mind becomes fertile ground for love and truth, not fear. Ruiz even suggests you can measure how impeccable you are with your word by your level of self-love. Using your word to affirm your own worth, your capacity, your lovability, that's powerful white magic directed right at yourself, actively breaking those old suffering agreements you made long ago.
That reframes everything. Okay, so once you start to grasp the power of your own word, how do you deal with the words and actions of others? Which I guess brings us neatly to the second agreement, don't take anything personally.
Yes, this one flows directly from understanding the first. The fundamental insight here is, well, it's huge. Nothing others do or say is actually about you.
Nothing. That's hard to swallow sometimes.
I know, but the idea is it's always, always about them. Their own internal dream, their programming, their fears, their agreements, their stuff.
Because everyone is living in their own subjective reality, their own little movie playing in their head.
Precisely. And taking things personally is presented as the ultimate act of selfishness, actually. It stems from what he calls personal importance, this underlying belief that everything revolves around me. When you take something personally, you essentially agree with whatever poison is being sent your way. You internalize it, let it in, and you become trapped by it, hooked right back into that dream of hell.
So not taking things personally, it's like building an emotional immune system. Is that fair?
That's a great way to put it. It's described as the gift of this agreement, absolute immunity to emotional garbage, emotional poison. Even if someone is actively trying to hurt you with their words or actions, if you don't take it personally, their poison literally can't touch you. It has nowhere to land.
Because taking it personally is what lets it in.
Exactly. Taking things personally fuels feeling offended, becoming defensive, getting into conflict, needing to be right. Recognizing it's about them and their stuff completely breaks that cycle.
There's a great analogy used in a material about wounds, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. If something someone says or does hurts you, it's not necessarily because their action is inherently hurtful in some objective way, but because you have pre-existing internal wounds, maybe from past experiences, from that domestication that their words or actions just happen to brush against. So in essence, by having those unhealed wounds and then taking their actions personally, you are the one inflicting the pain upon yourself in that moment.
Wow. Which ties right back to the first agreement then, about using your word impeccably on yourself. Healing those internal wounds makes you less likely to get triggered.
Exactly. They're all interconnected. Understanding that others are often just operating from their own fear, their anger, hate, jealousy, sadness, helps you see their actions as a reflection of their internal state, not some objective truth about you. Their emotional poison is their problem, not yours.
The freedom in that, I can see how that would be immense.
It really is. Anger, jealousy, envy, sadness, the desperate need for external validation, they start to lose their grip. You become immune to the black magicians, as Ruiz calls them, people trying to project their internal state onto you. You simply choose not to eat their emotional garbage.
This agreement feels like it could just dissolve so much unnecessary conflict and suffering in relationships in daily life.
It fundamentally changes your interactions. It allows you to start trusting yourself and your own choices more, freeing you from constantly needing external approval or fearing others' reactions. You can be more open.
How so?
Well, you could say I love you without the paralyzing fear of rejection, because their response is about them. You can ask for what you need clearly. You can say yes or no authentically without guilt or fear and follow your heart because you're no longer constantly reacting to what you think others might think or feel about you.
That's huge.
You understand? You're only responsible for your half of the street, your actions, your choices, not theirs.
Okay. Powerful. Moving on then, the third agreement. Don't make assumptions. This seems linked too.
Oh, absolutely. Intricately connected to the first two. We have this pervasive habit, don't we? Making assumptions about everything.
All the time.
About what others mean, why situations happen, about ourselves. And then the mind takes those assumptions, these guesses, and turns them into truth, solid fact.
And that chain reaction sounds, well, potentially disastrous.
It often is. Ruiz lays it out very clearly. You make an assumption, you inevitably misunderstand, you take that misunderstanding personally, agreement two. You get offended, you react with emotional poison, misusing your word, agreement one, and boom, you create drama, conflict, suffering, often for absolutely nothing real, just based on a guess.
So much pain in our lives really could be built on these unchallenged assumptions.
A huge amount. And often this habit stems from a fear of just asking for clarification, right? It somehow feels safer or maybe easier to just assume, even if we end up being completely wrong.
Yeah, asking can feel vulnerable.
It can. And then the metoti, that mental fog of conflicting ideas we mentioned, makes us really prone to misinterpreting things, to spinning these elaborate stories in our heads based on minimal information. Gives that really relatable example.
I don't know about the mall.
Yeah. Seeing someone smile at you across the mall and immediately creating an entire fantasy relationship in your head based on that single, probably totally random and meaningless action.
Guilty. We've all done versions of that, I bet.
Totally. Or in relationships, assuming your partner magically knows what you want or need without you ever clearly articulating it.
Oh, that's a classic setup for disappointment.
Exactly. Leading to hurt, disappointment, resentment when you're unspoken. Assumed expectations inevitably aren't met. It seems we feel this deep need to justify everything, to make sense of things, to feel safe, even if the sense we make is based on completely false assumptions.
And the book highlights what it calls the biggest assumption humans make. What's that?
This one is crucial. It's the assumption that everyone else sees life, thinks, feels, judges, and even abuses themselves and others exactly the way we do. This is why we're often so afraid to be authentic. We assume others will judge us with the same harshness as our own internal judge. We project our whole internal landscape onto everybody else.
And we make these kinds of assumptions about ourselves too, don't we?
Absolutely. Overestimating or underestimating what we're capable of. Because we don't honestly assess ourselves or ask ourselves deep questions, or maybe even admit our true desires to ourselves.
Yeah.
Or the classic one, assuming you can change someone else simply by loving them enough. Ruiz is clear. That's not how it works. Others change only when they are ready and willing. You can't force it with assumptions about your power.
So the counter practice is pretty straightforward then. Just communicate clearly.
Basically, yes. Instead of assuming, you make the active agreement to ask questions. Find the courage to ask. Instead of expecting mind reading, you clearly articulate, this is what I want, this is what I need, what do you want, what do you need? This whole process brings clarity to all your agreements, making them explicit and, well, impeccable.
And like the others, stopping assumptions transforms your word, your interactions.
It really does.
Yeah.
Clear communication makes your word impeccable, it dissolves misunderstandings almost instantly, and it frees you from so many of the pointless wars and dramas that assumptions constantly create. Now, it's a difficult habit to break, no question. It's so ingrained.
For sure.
It takes real awareness. But the action of consciously choosing to ask questions instead of defaulting to assumption that strengthens your will over time is part of that shift he talks about, from being a kind of black magician sowing confusion to a white magician creating clarity and understanding.
Okay. These first three agreements, be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions they really feel like they build on each other, setting the stage for a radically different way of being. And the fourth one, always do your best. Seems like.
Yeah.
Maybe the engine that makes it all possible, the action piece.
That's exactly right. The fourth agreement is all about action and integration. It's the commitment, the practice, that takes the first three agreements and makes them living habits. It's kind of the glue that holds it all together.
And your best. It's important to note it isn't some fixed, impossible standard, right?
Crucially, no. Ruiz is very, very clear on this.
Yeah.
Your best is dynamic. It fluctuates constantly, depends entirely on your state. In any given moment, are you rested or tired? Healthy or sick? Happy or upset? Your best when you're sick with the flu is going to look very different from your best when you're feeling fantastic.
Right.
And it also changes over time as you practice anything, including these agreements. Your best tomorrow will likely be different, hopefully better in some ways, than your best today. And your best in a year will be different still.
So the key is simply doing your best in that moment, whatever that looks like. No more, no less. Is that it?
That's the sweet spot. That's the balance. Trying to do more than your best is actually counterproductive. It wastes energy, goes against yourself. It often leads to burnout or taking longer to achieve something.
Yeah, pushing too hard.
Exactly. And on the other hand, doing less than your best. Well, that opens the door for frustration, self-judgment, guilt, regrets. The power lies in simply showing up and doing your best, whatever the circumstance dictates for that moment.
And the motivation, ideally, isn't the outcome or the reward, but the very act of doing itself.
This is a really profound shift if you can make it. Do your best because you love the action itself, or at least find presence and acceptance in it, not purely because you're attached to a specific reward or outcome down the line.
Like people who hate their jobs but just work for the paycheck.
Right. They suffer the action, the process, day in and day out, just waiting for the reward. Finding joy, or at least engagement and presence in the doing, is the secret to making this sustainable and even enjoyable.
What's the main payoff then of consistently doing your best, even when it's hard?
Freedom from the judge. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
When that internal critic tries to condemn you later for perceived failures or mistakes, you have the absolute, irrefutable answer. I did my best. There are no regrets possible when you know, honestly, that you gave it your all in that moment with the resources and state you had then. This practice leads directly, inevitably, to self-acceptance.
That makes sense.
Also, it reinforces the idea that repetition is the path to mastery. You didn't learn to walk or talk perfectly the first time, right?
Definitely not.
You fell down, you babbled nonsense, but you kept doing your best. It's the same with practicing these agreements. Doing it consistently, doing your best each time, even when you stumble, is what builds the new habits and makes you a master of your own life, eventually.
And it's tied to fully embracing life, isn't it? Taking action, expressing your unique dream, rather than staying stuck or paralyzed by fear.
Absolutely. Inaction, when it's driven by fear, is seen in this context as denying life itself. Every action, no matter how small, can become an expression of your dream, your aliveness. Ruiz even suggests making simple daily tasks, like taking a shower, into a kind of ritual.
A ritual.
By doing your best to be present, doing your best to honor and care for your body as you wash it, framing it as giving to and receiving from your body. He says honoring your body in this way is like honoring the divine, honoring God within you. You don't need external acceptance. Your very existence, your capacity for love and action, is an expression of your own divinity. Just being alive and loving yourself and others. It's like an expression of God to say, hey, I love you.
Beautiful. And this is the crucial link back to the first three agreements, isn't it? Doing your best is what enables the others to actually take root and become real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the key connection. You won't be perfect at being impeccable with your word or not taking things personally or not making assumptions, especially when you first start trying. Let's be real, the old habits are incredibly strong, deeply ingrained.
Decades of programming.
Right. But by doing your best, consistently making the effort to honor these new agreements, even when you mess up, and you will mess up, you gradually weaken the old patterns over time.
Yeah.
And importantly, you feel good about yourself during the process because you know you are making the effort, because you are consistently doing your best, regardless of the immediate results or slip-ups.
So always doing your best is the agreement that transforms you into a master of transformation, as the book calls it.
It's the active practice. It's what builds the necessary personal power and installs the new habits required to live the other agreements and ultimately, fundamentally change your internal and external reality.
So just to kind of wrap this framework up, the journey outlined here is about recognizing that our current suffering, that dream of hell, is often the result of these unconscious, fear-based agreements, largely absorbed through that process of domestication. And that by consciously adopting and crucially practicing these 4 new agreements, be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, And always do your best. You can effectively wage war on that internal parasite, reclaim your personal power, and literally transform your internal reality.
From hell to heaven, as Ruiz puts it.
From your personal hell to your personal heaven on earth.
Yeah. Now, it absolutely requires conscious effort. It takes a warrior spirit, that persistence, and a huge willingness to forgive yourself when you falter, because you will. Don't feed the judge when you slip up. Just get back up and do your best again.
Right.
But the material presents this possibility as entirely real, entirely within your grasp. Others have done it. It's possible to see the world with new eyes, to perceive love everywhere, to live in a state of bliss.
It's a profoundly challenging perspective, but also incredibly hopeful, isn't it?
Definitely hopeful. The power is within you to change the dream.
So maybe the final thought for everyone listening is this. If your current experience of reality is largely a dream shaped by agreements you didn't consciously choose, agreements that might be causing you pain, what new agreements will you commit to today, doing your best to start actively dreaming your heaven on earth?